Hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Heather Boykman. I'm an AmeriCorps member that is serving with Chagrin River Watershed Partners. And tonight we are joined by Christina, is it Znidarsic?
That's pretty good. Yeah,
Okay,
Znidarsic. Yeah.
Znidarsic, from Davey Resource Group. We will be having a Q&A at the end of the presentation, and if you can use the question area and enter your questions while the presentation is going on. And also that this webinar is being recorded and you can rewatch it at Chagrin River Watershed Partners YouTube channel. And you can also check out past speaker series from this year and years past. All right, Christina, are you ready to take it over?
I am. I just have one question.
Okay, no, go ahead.
Can you guys see a red dot moving around on the screen?
I can see a red dot.
Perfect. Then I am ready to move.
All
Okay.
right.
All right. So welcome, folks. Thank you for coming out to hear me talk to you about streams. I've been working with streams for a while. I am the design build leader for Davey Resource Group in our Northern Ohio office. Basically, we manage all the stream and wetland restorations in Northern Ohio. So that's my official title there. Unofficially, I answer to many titles, including an alum of Chagrin River Watershed Partners. I used to work for Chagrin River Watershed Partners. So basically, they know I'm always good to come and talk for these things. But I also enjoy doing it, so there's that. I've been with Davey Resource Group for a little over 2 years. And previously, I was with Chagrin River Watershed Partners for about 8 years. So I've got over a decade of stream and wetland restoration experience under my belt at this point. So this is just a little quick slide for tonight's agenda. Just going to start out kind of introducing you to what our streamside area is, using some terms and things like that. We'll talk about the benefits of healthy stream banks, the risks of unhealthy stream banks. We'll identify issues associated with them, and then some examples of applying solutions. I have a case study with a project that I just finished up about some residential erosion that we dealt with. And then also finishing it up with some resources that you guys can use. I threw in this joke. If you like this joke, I came up with it. If you don't, I found it somewhere on the internet. And I just want to be clear, if you are here to hear a presentation about financing, you are in the wrong presentation. Okay, let's move on. So what is a streamside area? We also call these riparian areas. So if you ever hear these things being referred to as riparian areas, they are one and the same. I really like this diagram because I feel like it just kind of effectively shows this in the simplest way possible. So you have your aquatic zone, which is basically where the water is. And then on either side of it, this is kind of what's known as your active floodplain, or your, in terms we call this the flood prone elevation, or where the flooding can occur. Within that is called basically your riparian zone. And then we also have over here, you have an upland zone, which is not part of what you would consider your flood area. So sometimes you have people describe things as like, oh, that's in the floodplain, or that's not in the floodplain. There is a regulatory term to a floodplain. I'm not going to be discussing things in that term tonight. When I say floodplain, I just mean areas where the water goes when it comes out of its typical bank full elevation, okay? So what makes a healthy streamside area? I took this picture a while back. I love this picture. This is over in Bainbridge Township. It is an example of what I would consider to be a delightfully healthy streamside area. They have you can see the native trees, the shrubs, nice deep-rooted plants, grasses to keep that soil on the stream banks. You can see that there's some overhead vegetation with some woody vegetation that's providing shading and cooling to the stream. That's exceptionally important in the Chagrin River watershed because the Chagrin is home to more cold water habitat streams than any other watershed in Ohio. Cold water habitat streams are special streams that are mostly fed through groundwater, and they have to maintain specific temperatures for the organisms that live and thrive in them. And so having that shading over the stream really helps to keep them cool. They also, the streamside vegetation also creates what's called roughness. So if you ever hear us stream nerds say things like roughness, that's a fancy way of saying the stream bank is bumpy and it has things that kind of help slow the water down. And it slows the water down to the point where it reduces that erosive effect that fast moving water has. Streamside plants, healthy streamside areas also help filter and settle out pollutants from like adjacent stormwater runoff before it comes into the stream. And that also provides, again, that relief area from the flooding. So when the stream comes up over its banks, it has this nice accessible floodplain area to engage with. And then when it spreads out like that, what it does is it dissipates the erosive energy of that stream because it's now spread out over a wider area. So having a healthy stream side with plants and that floodplain access is really important to stream health and also upstream, downstream flooding issues. That leads into my last point, which is that helps preserve and protect property and infrastructure. You essentially have these safety buffers between you and a stream. So what makes an unhealthy stream side area? Well, what are we seeing here? We are seeing, I would term this gently as a hot mess. What we have here is some attempts at unnatural or man-made stream stabilization attempts that the stream has clearly decided not today and has short-circuited. We have a large erosive area happening right here. You can see that this is turf grass maintained straight to the edge and mowed along the edge. You know, you have these near vertical banks. A lot of debris has come into the water now, and you can kind of see that the water down through here is not really looking very good down through here. This is a very confined channel. There's really no room for wherever when this water gets up, where's it going to go? It doesn't really get anywhere. So it just kind of shoots faster down the stream, and that can cause further issues. And this is a decrease in in-stream habitat quality. You have this excessive sediment going into the stream. It increases pollutants, and it also increases sediment. And sediment is one of the biggest pollutants that we have to Lake Erie. And it'll go into the substrate and do what's called embeddedness in the substrate, which is where these fines, the sediment fine, will go into the substrate and block it up and clog it. And fish and bugs, macroinvertebrates that need that clean substrate to feed around and rest and nest in, they can't use it as well. And so that decreases their use of the stream, and they will die out. So, you know, when you see things like this, this is kind of just a recipe for trouble. So what do I mean when I say deep-rooted plants? I love this diagram. I don't know how old this diagram is, but if you are a watershed person, you have probably seen this diagram at least 50 plus times in your lifetime. When I say deep-rooted, I mean deep-rooted. Not all native plants have such deep roots, but a lot do. And these types of root systems really help lock in and stabilize the bank. They do a lot of work. And it's not like these are like trees and shrubs, although trees and shrubs are great. But even just these little forbs can do things, can help. And if you're wondering what this little thing over here is, that's Kentucky bluegrass. So when we say that turf doesn't really do the job to hold back stream banks, it really doesn't. Those root structures are very short compared to these guys. So there's erosion, and then there's bad erosion. And I get a lot of questions from people who are like, okay, so when should I start worrying? All right, when should I really do something about this? And so I want to give a shout out to Cleveland Metro Parks, because there are scientific ways of assessing how severe your erosion is. It's called the Bank Erosion Hazard Index, or the BHI for short. And most residents really can't do a BHI well. Like, this is not something that the average person could just go out and do. You have to understand things, how to measure and identify bankful width in the field, and it can be a little bit difficult to do that. But Cleveland Metro Parks has taken that BHI and worked with it and modified it. And one of the things that I really like about their modified BHI is that they provide sort of a quick assessment check at the start. And this is kind of taken from that assessment check, which is basically like, how do you look at this and you kind of think if you have a problem or not? So in a very general sense, you want to think of it as a more than and a less than half situation. So you look at these different points and you look at it and you say, okay, this section of bank that I want to check out, if it's bad, is less than half of it protected. And by protected, I mean protected along the toe, which the toe is a fancy way of saying bottom. So like the bottom of the slope where it meets the stream. Is there any kind of protection down there? Is more than half of it protected? Is less than half of it protected? Is more than half of that bank section, is it undercut? So when you think of an undercut bank, it's kind of like a C shape in the bank, where the C is kind of like it's convex into the bank. So you'll see kind of like this scoop in the bank, and you have like overhanging vegetation sometimes underneath that. If that undercut is more than half a foot and it covers more than half of the bank section, that could be something to be concerned about. If more than half of the bank section is layered with different materials, with at least one layer being erodible. So I'm a geology major, so this is hard to explain simply, but basically it's like you can look at a bank and you can see when there's different layers of material. You can see maybe if there's like a gravel layer or like a fine layer or a clay layer or things like that. And if there's multiple layers, that could be okay. But if one or more of them is what's considered to be an erodible material, which is typically sand, gravel, or some kind of loose matrix, like if it comes out when you scratch it really easily, that could be a problem, and that could mean that this slope will erode pretty quickly. If more than half of the bank section is greater than 10-foot height, with more than half of that being bare soil. So tall bank heights and bare bank heights, basically the rule of thumb here is the more of that bank is exposed and bare, the more of a problem it could end up being. You want to look for things like exposed bare roots, because roots don't like to grow in the air. And so if you see a bank that has a lot of root exposure, that means that that soil has eroded out from around those roots, and those roots are no longer really doing the job of holding that bank back. And then, of course, if more than half of the bank is lacking rooted vegetation, and when I say rooted vegetation, I mean properly rooted vegetation, not like exposed roots hanging out there, but like good rooted vegetation. If more than half of the bank doesn't have that. So if any of these two things are true, that's usually an indication that you may have erosion happening that is more than normal. Because I want to be clear, there is such thing as normal erosion. Streams are dynamic things, and they are dynamic systems, and they take soil in certain places and they place it in other places. And a dynamic stream in dynamic equilibrium does have a little bit of give and take through it. But there are times and situations where that gets thrown out of equilibrium, and that's what I'm talking about here. How do you know when things might be out of equilibrium? So this is kind of an example, a visual example of what I'm talking about. So we have a stream. I like this picture because in a nutshell, it kind of encapsulates why we want to have healthy banks versus unhealthy banks and why we want to maintain that vegetation. I can't speak to the species. So if any of you guys are really good at plant ID and you're like, Christina, this is an invasive species, I'm sorry, but it is currently helping hold this bank together. So let's just pretend that all of this is native species. Like I said, I can't speak to the species on this one. But you can see that this side of the bank does have what's considered to be toe protection. The toe of the bank near the bottom is covered in protective vegetation. And there are no large bare soil areas. You might see a little bit right here or maybe a little bit right here, but for the most part, you don't see any large bare soil areas. There are very few exposed roots through here. I hardly see any. There might be a little bit right here. And then, of course, this slope has vegetation all along that slope. So this is an example of something where you might see this and you might think, I wonder if I should do something. It's probably doing okay. You probably don't need to act. If I would do anything on this side, I would maybe even extend this buffer a little bit and maybe plant more back here. But here on the other side, we have a problem. We have bare soil. We have exposed roots. You can see that those roots are hanging out right along the top of that. There's a lack of toe protection through here. This entire area is completely unprotected. There's no toe protection. And then there's also no vegetation on this slope. And what vegetation is present at the top of slope is that short turf grass, which doesn't really do a whole heck of a lot. So this is a situation where you do have erosion that's not part of a natural stream system. It is happening out of equilibrium. And so how do you fix that, right? So if you find something and you want to take action, there's different reasons for how people want to, when people take action for stream erosion. The most common reasons that I've encountered are obviously if it threatens structures, infrastructure, like roads, utilities, homes. A lot of projects that I do, like big projects, get started because some type of critical infrastructure is threatened and we have to go in and we have to do something about it. Negative impacts to water and stream habitat quality is another big reason why we would take action on these things. We want to maintain healthy streams. And in order to maintain healthy streams, we need to make sure that there's not excessive erosion occurring on these streams. And then also excessive loss of land and or property. Like maybe a structure isn't in play, but maybe you just don't like that you're losing land at the clip of like 2 foot a year or something like that. And then also poor aesthetics. Like for example, this isn't exactly like a terrible situation with erosion, but it doesn't look great, you know? And if I were a person and I saw this, I'd probably want to gussy this up a little bit and make it look a little nicer. And of course, depending on the severity of the erosion, a solution can probably be fairly simple or fairly complex. I do not envy the people who have to deal with this right now. So let's start talking about solutions applied across different scales. So I'm going to start with large scale erosion solutions, which is more what I deal with on a daily basis. I tend to do larger projects. When we work with erosion solutions on these larger projects, so say you have like hundreds of linear foot of eroding bank that you have to deal with, like this, for example, this is along the main stem of the Chagrin. And this bank is actually not supposed to be here. It's actually supposed to be right here. This bank has eroded this far back on this outer bend of the Chagrin. And that's not great because adjacent to this bank is a wastewater treatment plant. And so we have an issue here with infrastructure being threatened, and we also have excessive erosion contributing to relatively poor stream quality through this area. We use what are called bioengineering techniques when we want to restore streams. Natural is best. You always want to try to mimic those natural processes as best you can. And in a nutshell, bioretention involves essentially rooted vegetation as a critical restoration component. Now, you can introduce that rooted vegetation many different ways, but ideally you want to align it with natural processes, and you want to introduce that vegetation to add roughness to the bank. You can also use a combination of stone along with the vegetation, but vegetation is the critical component to bioengineering processes. The cool thing about bioengineering is that if you do it correctly, it actually strengthens over time as the vegetation matures and the roots take hold into the system. So we use things like vegetated riprap, which is just a fancy way of saying that we use, say, like toe stone protection down along here, and then we plant into above and around that toe stone. Branch layering, which is using literal live branches and soil lifts. So you're placing these branches into terraced soils up along the slope, and the branches will take root and grow into the slope. So you're essentially rebuilding the slope, but you're also adding branches into the slope as you're building it. Live poles and stakes, that's what these are right here. These are like live poles. So essentially these are live cuttings, typically willows or dogwoods of native species, and you insert them into the bank and they will grow. It's a great, cheap way to get some woody vegetation going on a site. They also provide a little bit of vertical stabilization to the matting when you add matting along an area. So, you know, they're nice to do. And then we also do things that are called root wads, which are basically exactly what they sound. If we have to harvest, say, a tree in the course of restoring a stream, we try to use that tree. We will tip it over and expose what's the root ball, or called the root fan. And we will place it in the stream, typically along you know, the bend of the stream, the outer bend of the stream, to provide additional stabilization with that root fan kind of sticking out of the bank. So the straight part of the tree is pegged into the bank, and then the root fan is sticking out of the bank. And those roots act as essentially sediment catchers to catch sediment and help build up the bank over time, thereby stabilizing the bank and reinforcing it. And oftentimes, as with this project, we will potentially add material into a bank to rebuild it out, but we will also grade out a floodplain. So this was a vertical bank before, essentially right here. And what we've done is we've added material and we've done this gentle floodplain bench. So when the water comes around and it rises up, it can spread out onto this bench and reduce some of its erosive velocity and force. So this is a specific project example that we just finished up. This was in Bainbridge Township. It's a private residential site, so it's literally some person's backyard. And the cool thing about this project is that when I was at Chagrin River Watershed Partners, I was actually out here in 2016. The then landowner, they are now not the resident, but the previous resident had called and had asked us to come out and look at this site. And so I was able to have pictures dating that far back, and you can see the change in erosion between 2016 and 2021 in basically the same location. This is a very, you know, easily identifiable tree. I named it the snag. And so the snag is here. and it has remained. We kept the snag. But you can see that there was some significant erosion just in those 5 years happening here. It's a near vertical bank situation here. This is a steep slope on this side. You used to have kind of like some nice gravel cobble substrate through here. And that has all changed. It is now basically hard pan through here and very embedded. So you have a distinct change in stream quality and habitat quality through this stream. In those 5 years, you have vertical banks, you have lack of floodplain engagement, and what that does is it basically creates an erosive flume that has started eroding out this bridge structure here. So you see this used to be all vegetated through here, and now it's getting blown out, and you can actually see the underpinnings of the bridge. This is another view looking upstream at the bridge. So this is in 2016, and there had been rocks and some erosion fabric laid down on this to try to prevent erosion. It wasn't successful, as you can see, and this whole area has basically blown out. These rocks that were all piled up through here have basically been redistributed further down in the channel. And you can see that where this was fairly built up here, it is now almost completely exposed, and it's starting to undermine the bridge right through there. And it is fairly well undermined through here as well. So, you know, this is obviously not really that safe for the residents to come down. Their house is right up here. This is literally their only access into their backyard. So, you know, the challenge here was, okay, there's their house up through here. So while it wasn't immediately threatening their home, this is providing a problem, and it's only going to get worse. And you have a steep slope here, you have a steep slope here. It is just down cutting, you have vertical banks, and eventually this bridge is going to get washed away, and it's going to become a problem for them with access to their yard. And then we also have here, this is a drainage pipe, and you can see that this slope through here with those exposed roots, because the water is now flowing around this bend basically and making what is essentially a right angle turn, which is something I rarely ask streams to do because it's very difficult for them to do this effectively. It is slamming into this side, and you can see that it has started undermining the slope, and eventually this tree will go, and potentially this tree at some point in the future. So we see a major issue through here, and we see problems happening and compounding further down the line just in these 5 years. So the resident wanted to do something about this, and one of the solutions that we thought was we looked downstream, and this is downstream, so their house is right here. This is downstream. You have a nice, well-developed riverine valley through here, so there's plenty of room for this stream downstream. And then upstream, you have that picture that I showed you earlier of a really nice wooded, you know, stream corridor. So upstream and downstream, there's some good bones to this system, is what I'm saying. And so, you know, really, this middle section through this person's backyard is kind of the only serious trouble spot. But it is going to threaten the quality of these upstream and downstream sections if it keeps deteriorating. Because if one section of a stream stays in disequilibrium, it will throw other sections upstream and downstream also out of equilibrium. So the solution here, rather than trying to deal with protecting this slope and dealing with the erosion that's inevitably occurring all along this existing channel, we actually decided to relocate the channel. This was the solution that the landowner liked the most, and it was also the most ecologically sound long-term solution because it took the stream away from these pressure points that were existing. It eliminated the need for that bridge crossing that's right here, because if we can fill this section and then rebuild the stream through here, then this person doesn't need to cross the stream to get into their backyard. They can still enjoy their yard here. They'll lose a little bit of their yard in terms of like the turf, but they were amenable to that because of the benefit they would receive by not having to deal with this deteriorating stream system through their yard. So we would make this new stream. And the good thing about this is that all along this end, for a very long portion of their property is just natural woods. So by moving the stream up, we're actually reconnecting it with a large riparian area and adjacent floodplain. So it's going to gain all the benefits of that. There's a wetland right here that it can now engage with. There's adjacent floodplain through here that it can engage with. And then we are going to build a floodplain bench along the southern side here. This portion of the project would remain as this person's yard so that they could at least have some yard. But this whole section through here would become basically a natural stream corridor. So one of the things that we did, here I'll go back to this, we built in the dry. So we did not just start cutting into this and having this stream start flowing as we're building it. We actually we left a portion of this intact here as a plug. And this stream continued to flow all through the project area until we were completely done. And then we broke the downstream and upstream ends and we allowed it to free flow through the system. The benefit of that is that we had minimal impact to existing stream, upstream and downstream. And by building in the dry, we didn't have to worry about potentially having erosion issues come in and go downstream. So this is constructing that new stream in the dry. It's a little bit of water seeps into this, but essentially what we're doing is creating that dry channel. We're installing what are called grade control structures, which help to control that erosive downward force that can erode and incise a stream and create those steep slopes that you saw earlier. We are essentially just piling dirt in this poor person's backyard. I'm sure they were looking at this while this was happening and thinking they will never have a backyard again, but just stay with us, we'll get you there. And the other thing that we were doing is you can see that we're excavating out these nice floodplain areas for that riparian area. So this is looking from the person's house in November 2022, shortly after we were done, and we allowed the stream to reconnect through its new corridor. And the stream very eagerly claimed its corridor. This was right after a rain, so it was basically at bank full at this point. And you can see that it's just at the incipient point of flooding where it might start to spill over into that floodplain, which is really nice. It's engaging its entire bank full. We calculated the appropriate bank full width for this, which was approximately about 8 foot bank full width, to give it what is considered a stable stream profile for this area based on the drainage area. You'll notice the bridge is still here. We left the bridge. We thought it was a cute element. The landowner wanted it to remain as just kind of a point to get down into their yard now. But that previous incised degraded stream has been filled now. And this is the new stream. You can see where it's connecting right at this upstream end. And then this is looking downstream and it's connected at the downstream end too. So this is the furthest downstream end of the project. What we did do is we retained some of the original channel and we turned it into an oxbow wetland. And it's really nice right here. There's like skunk cabbage coming up and all sorts of nice stuff. So this is really looking good. And the landowners love this little oxbow. It's such a nice little feature. But we've created this nice riparian corridor now that basically seamlessly connects with the downstream area on the adjacent neighbor's property. And it looks much better through here. And you can see it just flowing down through there. And then what we've done is we've matted and seeded the sides with native seeds. And you can already see that nice gravel cobble substrate coming through in the stream bed through here. It just looks so nice now. Just really healthy substrate happening already in the stream, it's really impressive to see how a stream reclaims itself when you give it the room, to do that. And then this is us we did native plugs and woody plants along the stream corridor to replenish that riparian corridor. It's going to have a more truncated riparian corridor on the southern side, obviously because of the person's backyard, but it has such a nice new riparian corridor to engage with on the northern side, and they will maintain a width of this in perpetuity as native. So that's a large scale erosion problem. And you're probably thinking, holy moly, I really hope I never have to do anything that intensive in my yard, even though that did turn out really nice. Fortunately, most residential issues tend to be what I call the small scale erosion solutions. And my best advice to you for a small scale erosion solution is just solve the problem before you even have it. So, you might look at this and you might say, well, I don't really see any erosion. Like there's grass, but it's turf grass. And you can see or hear where the slope steepens a little bit. You can kind of see along the crest here that it's not as good as it could be right here. Maybe we just plant this corridor with some native, like just give it some nice woody species right along this corridor right through here. And that could go a long way towards solving any potential problems before they even start. Some cases you might need to do some light bank grading in addition to that planting, or maybe installing some stone at the toe of the slope for extra help. So like this section right here, this was an eroding section. So some toe stone was installed along here and some plants were planted along this, and really just kind of letting this native buffer establish has done so much for this section of land that was previously eroding. So the other thing you can do is if you don't have a problem, or you're worried that you have one, or if you have a stream, you can just start monitoring your stream. Establish some kind of known point. Like say you could measure maybe from the edge of this to the edge of bank, and just go out and do that every once in a while. Sometimes erosion happens and you haven't even noticed it's happened until like 5 years later, and you're like, holy cow, where'd my land go? So just monitoring that and making sure that it's not getting out of hand is a really great way to stay on top of things and be able to proactively solve any solutions before they even start becoming super expensive. One of my favorite tips for homeowners is if you have any native dogwoods or willows or things like that on your property, like say like red osier dogwood or a native willow, you can take cuttings from them and you can stud your stream bank with those cuttings. You want to insert them to about 2/3 of the cutting. I usually like to say a good rule of thumb is about anywhere from like 2.5 to 3 foot in length, and you want to put it 2/3 into the bank. And if it's a fresh cutting, and it will grow. And I usually recommend folks do this either in the early part of the year or at the late part of the year when the woodies are starting to go dormant. So this stresses them out a lot less, and they're more successful when you plant them during these phases of dormancy. But that's a good low-cost way to just kind of start proactively encouraging that type of native growth on your banks. So, you don't have to take my word for it. There are lots of really great stream resources out there to help you understand what you can do and what your options could be in terms of dealing with erosion, and also helping maintain healthy stream banks. My big recommendation are your friendly local watershed organizations like Chagrin River Watershed Partners, as well as your county soil and water conservation district. SWCD they do a lot of work with erosion, and a lot of soil and water conservation districts have excellent resources on their websites, or they could come out and assist you with a landowner visit or something like that. I've linked to Cuyahoga Soil and Water Conservation District's publications page. They have a lot of really great publications on that page, like the Watershed Friendly Stream Maintenance Guide that I've put a photo of here. This is more of a guide for community level work, but it's also got good tips in it for backyard resources and things like that. The other link that I have is to Chagrin River Watershed Partners' webpage. The specific Taking Care of Streams page has a lot of really nice landowner resources for small scale solutions and things you can do and tips that you can apply. So these folks will help you. They can also help you understand your issue better in terms of like, will I need a permit? So working in streams and waterways, oftentimes, depending on what you're trying to do, can require a permit with the state of Ohio and the federal government through the Army Corps of Engineers, as well as potential for local permits. So understanding and navigating those permits can sometimes be confusing and frightening. That is a large part of what I do, is helping my clients navigate those regulatory hurdles and making sure that they are getting the permits they need for their projects. So making sure that you understand whether or not you need one and how you can go about getting one is also important. So with that, I thank you. And I wanted to leave a lot of time for Q&A. If you guys have any questions for me about things, there's a lot to talk about here. And I'm happy to go into more detail on anything you saw, or if you have a question that you feel like I didn't address, I'm happy to answer that for you.
All right. I have questions in the box. All right, I'm just kind of going through them. Let's see.
Okay.
All right. I'm just trying to make sure this person didn't answer their own question. All right. Not a question. Okay, that's not a question. All right, so we're gonna go with this question. A our natural, let's see, sub, um, so they have an example. A tree falls in that creates a natural dam. Is it beneficial or should they be removed to keep the water flowing as normal?
Good question.
I must say that is a tough one.
It is a tough one. I am going to give the answer of it depends. So it depends a lot on your given situation. Um, Tree fall in stream systems is a natural thing. And tree throw is, I mean, I spend time building projects that literally mimic that. Okay, so like I'm actually creating intentional log jams sometimes on projects and things because a well-placed root wad can help create a deep pool that provides excellent fish habitat for feeding and resting. But done right, and sometimes these things get out of hand or they create these scour areas on the bank that could threaten adjacent infrastructure or things like that. So you need to look at it in its context. What is the context of how that's behaving? Is it in the stream and maybe there's a little bit happening there in terms of like some scour and things, but it's not extreme and it's not adjacent to a road, for example, or something like that? Is it in a natural area? You can probably let that ride because that's a natural process. If, however, it's in a situation in a context where this could potentially cause an issue. It's near my house. There's a portion of this bank is eroding near a road or things like that. Then yeah, you would probably want to remove it. The other thing I would think of that's important is considering downstream infrastructure. So if there's like a bridge downstream and it could maybe dislodge and move downstream and hit that bridge, it could cause damage to the bridge. So thinking about it in the context of that downstream infrastructure as well. So, and that's a long way of saying it depends. Just making sure that you kind of understand your upstream, your downstream, the different impacts associated with that, and taking it as it will. I would say that if there's any reason to leave it, do, because it is a natural process. So.
All right. Since you're promoting stream bank restorations on private property to private property owners,
Mhm.
what would be the best measurement in feet of vegetation to prevent erosion? Ohio Scenic Rivers webinar suggestion was 120 feet.
I'm going to say bigger is better. I'm going to say go as big as you think you can go. I fully understand that 120 feet may not be feasible for people. Heather, am I allowed to stump for the riparian legislation that Sugar River Watershed Partners has in place in terms of how they determine their setbacks?
Sure, you're
Okay.
allowed.
Don't want to steal thunder or anything. But so when Sugar River Watershed Partners was developing their model codes for riparian setbacks, which are essentially protected zoning areas placed along stream edges, we went off of drainage area and kind of calculated what would be like an okay amount of protection to place along the edge of the stream relative to the drainage area. So a smaller drainage area needed less and a large drainage area needed more. And I think our maximum was, it was up there. It was over almost, I want to say almost 200 feet off the top of my head. I mean, like and that would be for things like the chagrin main stem or things like that. And, obviously bigger is better. But thinking about it in the context of what am I capable of providing, I would say as much as you reasonably can. Like for example, that backyard residential project, the buffer on the southern side is about 8 foot because we basically took the bank full and we doubled it to provide what we would consider to be like an adequate native floodplain benching area. And so, that was just a calculation that we did to try to determine what would be, the most reasonable thing we could ask this person to do that wouldn't essentially eat their backyard, because the option was to eat their backyard. And we didn't want to do that to them. So, it was striking that balance. However, on the northern side of that stream, we knew we had riparian for days. We've got that beautiful long natural riparian buffer. So, it kind of makes up for it on that side.
All right. Oops. What are the best native plants for, I guess, to hold soil back from stream erosion for Ohio streams? Are there any other than dogwoods and willows?
Yeah. There are. So, there's whole hosts of plants that can be good for that. Chagrin River Watershed Partners does maintain plant lists that have beneficial streamside plants. If you guys want to follow up with them, they can just shoot that over to you guys as a PDF. I hope I'm not lying when I say that, but I could definitely do that when I used to work at Chagrin River Watershed Partners. So I'm hoping that you guys can still do the
I'm
same.
sure it's probably on. I'm sure I could find it.
I'm sure you can. So if you can't talk to me, I probably have it on an archive
Yeah.
somewhere myself. So, but yeah, I mean, long story short, yes, there are, and ODNR also has some streamside lists as well of woody plants and also forb species and things like that that are suitable for like streamside plantings or like wet watershed wetland plantings and things of that nature. So those things are available, and Chagrin River Watershed Partners should be able to point you to that. So.
All right. This person said they had tried to insert living stakes into their stream edge, but it was too rocky. They couldn't like get to go in all the way. So any
Yeah.
suggestions on what to do?
So I have a tip. I have installed live stakes in January when the stream bank was frozen solid. And what I did was I had a piece of rebar and I kind of sharpened the edge of the rebar was a little bit sharper. And I used that with a rubber mallet and I tink, 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 put in a pilot. And you may not be able to do that if it's like super rocky because you're just going to try to get through a rock. But if you can like get that rebar is easier to get through and around rocky areas, and having that mallet helps. I would recommend though that if you have wrist issues, do not do that for very long. Like do a couple, take a break, wear a wrist brace if you have one, because I did it for an hour or so and my wrists definitely complained afterwards. So just a safety tip there, if you're going to use that method, make sure that you're thinking about and protecting your wrists, but it does work. And you can get those pilot holes and then you just kind of put it right in the pilot hole.
All right. This is a lengthy one, so I'm just trying to figure out the best way to shorten it, or if it's a comment, because it's like weird because with GoToWebinar, they can only put in the question area. All right, so this
Is
seems
there a
more
way
like a
I can see questions or
comment.
no? Am I
Yeah, I
dependent
don't
on you?
know. I pretty much, I think. So,
Okay.
whoops. And it stinks how it like when somebody adds one, it bumps me off the one I was looking at. All right. Some of these examples point out the need for requiring setbacks for buildings and other modifications. These should be at least for the Mandarin belt within plus an additional setback. So I'm guessing they're saying that you should go back even further
Yeah, the
if,
meander belt width.
yeah, the
Yes.
meander
So
beltway.
in an
Okay, so I
ideal
feel like this is
setting,
more of a comment than an
yeah, and
actual
they're not
question.
necessarily wrong. In an ideal setting, you think about that meander belt width, which is basically if a stream is moving, it's a dynamic thing. So as that stream kind of moves in its floodplain, you want to make sure you're accounting for all that movement. And you want to make sure that you've got your protections to the width of that movement plus some. Okay, so that's what they're saying, and they're not necessarily wrong. That would be in an ideal situation, being able to provide that much buffer protection on a stream would be amazing. However, in many situations, we're constrained. And so, if stuff has already been developed around a stream or you're dealing with things like that, it can be very difficult to get that going. So, that goes back to my earlier comment where like bigger is better. Go big. If you can go big, absolutely go big and do that. Make sure that you're accounting for all that movement of that stream and getting that meander belt covered. But in many situations you can't. And so in that point, I would say do as much as you reasonably can. Just try to do your best there.
All right, so person says their stream edge is pretty shaded, so they want to know if red twig dogwood would take there.
I think my answer to that is it depends on how shaded.
Yeah,
Because when they say red twig, they also mean red osier, so that's the same name for that.
yeah.
And so I've planted them in woody corridors, but typically where there's, you get at least better than partial sun. I would say that if it doesn't see more than like 4 hours a day of sun, it might be dicey. That's why I encourage the cuttings, because at least it's like there on your property and you don't necessarily have to feel bad if you bought it and you planted it and it didn't take. So it might be good to see if you can get some of those and see if they can take. But yeah, otherwise, you can look up shadier situations. I've not really, they're not commonly used for cuttings, but spice bush is a wonderful native plant that thrives along stream banks and in shaded wooded areas. And so, you might need to buy that in like a container version or things like that, rather than finding it through cuttings. I don't know if you can find it through cuttings. If you have spice bush on your property, you could try with cuttings from spice bush and see if that works, if it's super shaded. I love spice bush. It's so great. And the cool thing about spice bush is that deer tend not to browse on it as heavily as other plants. So
That is true. And it smells
mhm,
good.
smells great. It's called spice bush for a reason.
Yeah, I
So,
know. That I've tried the berries. Not a fan of
mhm.
the berries.
Okay, so berries, I powder them, dry them
Okay.
and powder them. And you can use it as like, if you ever use like sumac powder,
Mhm.
spice bush powder.
Oh. Yeah, I just took one off a spice bush, popped it in my mouth, and I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, no. All right. So this person has a large compost pile about 10 feet from the edge of our stream. I've read that this is such a no. Why?
It's a no. Okay, yeah, because, well, it's 10 foot off your stream edge. Is there a risk of, is it like taller than it's close? Like, is it like more than 10 foot tall? Is there a situation where this compost pile could migrate to the stream? Is it on a slope, for example? Is the slope heading towards the stream? Because think about if all that rich organic material got just dumped in the stream. And what that does is that upsets the pH of the stream, it upsets the habitat of the stream, it clogs the stream and blocks it, and it can create erosion issues. Um, it'll wash downstream, you'll lose all your compost. I mean, like there's so many reasons to say like maybe don't do that, or put a barrier around it on that side. Like if you've got space, get like some I don't know, just some like landscaping stones or something like those little bricky stones that you can buy at, landscaping stores, and just maybe put a little edge around that compost pile on that side, or something like that, just to kind of prevent that migration, if at all possible.
Yeah, that just made me think of like the algal blooms on the western basin of
I mean, a
Lake
lot of
Erie.
communities, a lot of communities have ordinances or rules about dumping in a stream, meaning you
Yeah.
can't just take a bunch of stuff and just put it in a stream. So while you may not necessarily be picking up that compost pile and putting it in a stream, there's the risk that it could do that. And the reason why we say don't dump in a stream is because it creates hazards and nuisances, and it also degrades stream quality. So, yeah.
Yeah. That definitely is a no.
But I'm not judging too hard because composting
Yeah.
is great. Let's
Yeah,
keep the
composting's great.
compost.
Yeah.
Let's
Let's
protect
keep
that edge.
positive.
Let's keep it away from the stream, and then we're good. So,
Yeah. So, all right. I'm just gonna make sure I'm not missing any questions because I cleared my question thing.
mhm.
But I know I'm waiting. They're usually pop in. They're like, "Oh, she doesn't have any more. I'll give her more," which I don't
Okay.
blame them. This is the time to ask any questions. I don't know, like me, always thinking, trying to always educate my family because my family is one of those people that are like, oh, make things like
My family has heard me talk about this for so
we can
long.
control it. And it's like, no, you can't.
Mhm.
Um, I know, like I'm trying to think where I was. Oh, I know where I was. A little story, for everyone. So I got to go to the Manor Brook, um, was it Manor Brook restoration that
Mhm.
CRWP just helped finish in South Russell, and they were talking about how the stream was straightened, and so many people were like, well, why was it straightened? And we're like, probably from farming. And it classically, I live in Middlefield, so I think of when I drive over the Cuyahoga towards
Mhm,
Burton and how it's straight. It's because I guess back in like the 1800s, there was an onion farmer that was like, I'm going to straighten the river. And he
mhm,
straightened part of it, and it's
mhm.
still straight.
Yeah,
So,
that's the fancy term for that is channelization, and it's
yeah,
not great. It
no,
is unfortunately a thing that we've done to a lot of streams. And going back to that earlier comment about that meander belt, streams are meant to move, and you got to accommodate for that, or else they're going to find a way, and you're probably not going to enjoy it when they do. So,
no. They
mhm,
usually don't find the way that you want them to go.
mhm. Yeah. I do want to bring something up, speaking about that. Going back to my previous slide about, am I still sharing my screen? I think I am.
Yes, you are.
Going back to my previous slide, there was like all this. Let's keep going. Um, this about natural being best with bioengineering
Mhm.
techniques. Um, there's a reason why I say that, which is that there are other techniques that will stabilize a stream, okay? Like sheet pile. If you're ever driving and you see like a wall, like a metal wall, sheet pile wall, or like gabion baskets, which was going back to that earlier slide that I had. That's a gabion basket right here. Okay. So, going back to those thoughts about when we do that, it's called hard armoring. So like when we hard armor a stream like that, and we don't accommodate for that that floodplain access or that ability for the stream to actually rise up and spread out a little bit and dissipate some of its energy. What that does is when the flow comes up, it concentrates that flow because you have more volume, more velocity, more force that is still in a confined space, and it's not getting better. And that really causes the stream to just rip. And when I say rip, I also mean rip into things. Okay, so it can cause pretty serious downstream issues. And then also, when I talk about a stream being a natural system, where when it's in what's called dynamic equilibrium, it gives in some places and it takes in others. And when you remove its ability to do that by hard armoring a stream, it can't stay in equilibrium, and it will throw the stream out of equilibrium in some way. It's just a question of how, because it can no longer have that give and take there where it previously did. And so it might take a little bit more somewhere else, or it might dump a little bit more over here, or things like that. And then suddenly you might be like, where'd my land go? And it's because there was something done, like that eliminated that stream's ability to move and behave more naturally. Which is why we encourage those bioengineering techniques, because they mimic the natural system as much as possible, and they allow for the natural stream process to work rather than working against the natural stream process. So.
That's very interesting. It kind of makes me wanna. There's a stream that's in town that is pretty well armored and
Mhm.
in town, and then it goes into a pipe and it flows out. But it's like one of those things where I'm like, I wonder what it looks like down that way.
And sometimes there's just no way around it.
Yeah,
Sometimes that infrastructure is adjacent and you just don't have room to lay a bank back, or something like
yeah,
that. Or you can't degrade the bed to make more space or something. You just can't do it. And
yeah.
it's between using that sheet pile or something like that and losing that house, or and so at that point that decision needs to be made. So I'm not saying that it is never done and it's evil. It's just that
Mhm.
that should be your last resort. You should never just default to hard armoring a stream. You should look for these natural bioengineering alternatives as much as you can first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It definitely seems like they were used more in the past than they are now.
Yeah, the science has gotten more insistent about this, and we now see the long-term benefits of going with these techniques. Stream restoration science has been around for a long time, and it's constantly evolving. We're constantly developing new practices and ways to do things, and learning and constantly going back and looking at what we've done and how we can do it better, and assembling that better toolbox and bringing it to communities and people, decision makers, who can then see that toolbox and see the benefits. Like, for example, the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District has done so much work in terms of embracing that green infrastructure component, thinking of streams as assets, actual assets, assets to be maintained in a good way, rather than just, subjugated or something like that. And that type of mentality is so beneficial to us as a whole. And it certainly makes my job easier. But it's just a healthier way of thinking. Our streams are, you think about streams as the blood of the earth, essentially, and it's death by 1,000 cuts. You eliminate enough veins and the heart dies. And so we always have to think about that and making sure that we're, maintaining our land as well as we would want to maintain our bodies. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's very good. Well, that's all the questions and stuff I have. And there's no more questions on our question box. But if you do think of any questions after we end the webinar, I always usually send out a survey at the end of these the next day. So you can always be like, hey, I have a question that I thought of,
Mhm.
and I will get an answer for you.
Yeah, and then on my end, let's just fast forward through all this business. If anybody is still here, if it was maybe just Heather and us talking. Oops, I clicked out of
Nope,
it.
there's some people
I can
still with
still,
us. So,
okay. So there's my email.
all right. I can also add it to the email. So if they have a dying desire to get a question answer. So, all right.
Well, thank you
A
all.
person says thank you. So,
There's still a couple of y'all left. Thank you so
yep.
much.
Thank you. Everybody have a good night.
All right. Thank you. You
All
too.
right. You're welcome. Bye.